But first off, what I'm going to do right now is introduce John Kennedy. John is the Deputy Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And I've had the opportunity to work with John over the course of probably the last 13 to 15 years on a number of different issues and things, whether it be wilderness policy for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service refuge system. I believe John helped us and may have done an interagency personnel agreement as we developed policy over the course of the last 10 years or so. But what John really has helped us with is through his association with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, he stepped up and he participated in our steering committee. And John has been a very influential member of that steering committee. He has provided us with great input. He provided us with a tremendous amount of influence on this conference. And I have to say that my perspective has always been that there are two primary organizations that really have responsibility for wildlife conservation in this country, from both a legal and our shared role, is the state agencies. And that's just the way that it's facilitated between the states and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and that's a good relationship for us to have, and most of the time it works very well. So I share that feeling. I believe strongly about it, and Sam Hamilton used to say there should never be any daylight between us and our partners, our associates with the state agencies. So I very much believe in that. And John holds a master's degree in wildlife management from South Dakota State. He's now active as the Deputy Director for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And I also know about John that he's passionate about introducing children to the tradition of hunting in his home state of Wyoming. So without anything else, let's get John up here from the great state of Wyoming. Thank you, sir. Awesome having you here.
Good morning. Thank you, Greg. Just a quick comment before I start. I've worked with the states and the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. I've worked with Dan, with Greg Sakanik, with Jim Kurth, and others for, as Greg mentioned, 12 to 15 years actually. And I know at times, Dan and Greg and Jim, that I've brought some other states with me at times to our meetings to kind of help me get the point across. But I would say that you definitely have me outnumbered today. So, on behalf of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this general session discussion and to provide some perspectives on this national effort. I want to thank the Fish and Wildlife Service for involving the association throughout the entire vision process, specifically the service's action to involve us on the vision process steering committee is very much appreciated. It provided meaningful opportunities for discussing our perspectives and our priorities for the refuge system. I want to thank Greg and the rest of the steering committee. I also want to give special thanks to Cynthia Martinez and Rebecca Martin for helping me keep up with the steering committee, which I know is not an easy task. I appreciate that. This cooperative work with the association and the states sends a strong message that the service recognizes the state's authorities and is committed to working cooperatively with us in the future, and we very much appreciate that commitment, and we're equally committed as well. Although the current version of the vision document does not reflect all the input we provided during the last several months, we're hopeful that additional changes can be made to the document based on these discussions this week. For this general session, I was asked to provide some perspectives on the North American wildlife conservation model, and in particular, the importance of the refuge system to hunting and angling. And in terms of the purpose of this general session, I want to provide some perspectives on the importance of conservation partnerships in terms of the future management of the refuge system, and in terms of a connected conservation constituency, the importance of recognizing hunters and anglers as important conservationists and leaders of that constituency. Clearly, the refuge system and this national effort are very important to the association, individual states, and hunters and anglers. Collectively, we have a long-standing interest and involvement in the refuge system and its contribution to fish, wildlife, and habitat conservation. We were extremely active in deliberations leading to the passage of the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act and in the drafting of its implementing policies. The Improvement Act established, as all of you know, a statutory mission for the refuge system to administer a national network of lands and waters for the conservation, management, and where appropriate, restoration of fish, wildlife, and their habitats. With the Improvement Act, Congress affirmed that national wildlife refuges are for fish and wildlife conservation as a high priority, clearly setting them apart from other federal public lands. In addition, through the Improvement Act, Congress directed the service that compatible wildlife-dependent recreational uses, which certainly include hunting and fishing, are the priority general public uses of the refuge system and shall receive priority consideration in refuge planning and management. This priority consideration of fish and wildlife and hunting and fishing and hunters and anglers is important given the significant historic and ongoing role of hunters and anglers in management of the system. This role has been strong since 1903 when President Theodore Roosevelt with the Boone and Crockett Club and other conservationists established Pelican Island as the first national wildlife refuge. The sale of duck stamps, migratory bird hunting conservation stamps purchased by hunters, historically provided the bulk of the funding for acquisition of refuges across the nation. This hunter-based revenue for land acquisition continues to be an extremely important source of funding for the refuge system. And hunters and anglers and the sport, fish, and wildlife restoration programs continue to provide significant funding for fish, wildlife, and habitat management on refuges across the country. I think it's important to recognize that this hunter and angler-based funding supports all conservation, all fish and wildlife, game and non-game species on refuges. Thanks to the efforts of hunters and anglers and other conservationists, we now have extensive public lands, including national wildlife refuges, that support abundant fish and wildlife populations that belong to all of us as a people as a whole. This is the heart of the North American wildlife conservation model. And that's why hunting and fishing are priority general public uses of the refuge system, and why we have continued to emphasize, as Congress did in 1997 through the Improvement Act, the important link between sportsmen and women and conservation in the refuge system. The bottom line is this: there is an important link between hunting, fishing, and conservation. Maintaining strong hunting and fishing traditions and opportunities on national wildlife refuges is critical for the conservation of all fish and wildlife species within the system. The role of sportsmen and women, not just as hunters and anglers, but as extremely important conservationists, must be recognized and emphasized as the service moves forward with this renewed vision. We simply cannot lose sight of the traditional partners with the refuge system, such as hunting and fishing organizations, who played an important historic role in the establishment of refuges to begin with, and who continue to have an important role in funding management of the refuge system. And again, that funding goes to the conservation of all fish and wildlife species. Clearly, strong conservation partnerships, and there are many, are critical for the refuge system and for the future of the system. The American Wildlife Conservation Partners, Wildlife and Hunting Heritage Conservation Council, Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council, and all of the individual agencies and organizations involved in those partnerships work aggressively to promote fish and wildlife conservation and preserve America's hunting and fishing traditions. Those individuals and organizations also work aggressively to promote what you all do. The Cooperative Alliance for Refuge Enhancement represents a diverse group of fish and wildlife conservation organizations, sportsmen's organizations, environmental organizations that support and advocate enhanced funding for the refuge system. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies was a founding organization of the CARE Group. These conservation partnerships must be recognized, supported, and engaged during this national effort to renew the vision. And for sure, these partnerships must be engaged in implementation of the renewed vision. So, as recommended improvements to the vision document, here's some main themes and recommendations that I want to emphasize during this conference and that I've been talking with the steering committee about for the last several months. One, although some references to land and species protection is appropriate in certain aspects of the renewed vision, We should not forget about the service's statutory mission to administer a national network of lands and waters for the conservation, management, and where appropriate, restoration of fish and wildlife and their habitats. There's a very strong emphasis in the current version of the vision document on protection, and again, that is appropriate in some components of that plan, and certainly some of the things we heard about yesterday, protection's critical for, but not over conservation management and restoration. Whether it's intended to or not, this overemphasis in land and species protection is sending the wrong message to some states and to hunters and anglers. We have no argument that the conservation mission of the system is preeminent and that the service, in cooperation with state fish and wildlife agencies, is obligated to fulfill that mission. But it is at the same time crystal clear that the big six wildlife-dependent recreational uses are the priority public uses on most refuges, and Congress has directed the service to facilitate those uses. In terms of actual recommendations, the vision document could be enhanced, in our opinion, by recognizing the importance of the North American wildlife conservation model, the importance of refuges for hunting and fishing, the important role of hunters and anglers in supporting fish and wildlife conservation in the refuge system. For example, there is one recommendation in the current vision document, number 17 out of 24, that specifically addresses hunting and fishing opportunities on refuges. And although there is some recognition of hunters and anglers in the introduction and the preface of the vision document, there are no vision statements or recommendations that facilitate cooperation and partnerships with hunters and anglers. Chapter 3, a connected conservation constituency, the very theme of this general session this morning, does not currently mention hunters and anglers at all in that chapter. And as a final theme, we shouldn't minimize by not adequately explaining the importance of the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act and related policies, such as the policies on appropriate refuge uses and wildlife-dependent recreational uses with respect to future management of the system. As we discussed this vision document during this conference and prior to moving forward with implementation of a renewed vision, I hope that we can discuss an approach that addresses the following important themes in the following order. 1, the statutory mission of the refuge system as established by the Refuge System Improvement Act. 2, the importance of individual refuge purposes reflected in enabling legislation, executive order, or administrative action for guiding future management of the refuge system. 3, the importance of the Improvement Act related policies that I've mentioned already this morning, including appropriate refuge uses and wildlife-dependent recreational uses. 4, coordination and cooperative work with the states pursuant to a policy for coordination and cooperative work with the states. 5, the importance of the North American wildlife conservation model and the role of hunters and anglers in the future management of the refuge system. And of course, in terms of refuges in Alaska, the new vision and certainly implementation of actions pursuant to that new vision should not include actions that are inconsistent with the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. We urge the service to consider this approach when finalizing the vision document. This would not require a substantial amount of work. It simply would involve moving some very important information from the preface and introduction sections of the document onto some meaningful recommendations and visions. This approach makes a lot of sense to us, the states, as it's completely consistent with congressional direction and service policies for the refuge system. This approach would be upfront and clear about the statutory mission of the refuge system, legislative coordination and cooperative work with the state fish and wildlife agencies, and the important conservation role of hunters and anglers. The transparency and collaborative spirit of this vision process and our discussion of a connected conservation constituency as part of Conserving the Future are extremely important. However, there is explicit congressional direction regarding management of the refuge system that cannot be lost or minimized in this vision process. Wildlife-dependent recreational uses such as hunting and fishing are priority general public uses of the refuge system that cannot be minimized in this vision process. A quote from one of my heroes. In a civilized and cultured country, wild animals only continue to exist at all when preserved by sportsmen. The excellent people who protest against all hunting and consider sportsmen as enemies of wildlife are ignorant of the fact that in reality, the genuine sportsman is by all odds the most important factor in keeping the larger and more valuable wild creatures from total extermination. Theodore Roosevelt. As we discuss passing the torch to the next generation and the call to action at this conference, hunters and anglers and hunting and fishing on refuges should be recognized, respected, and considered as extremely high priorities. Thank you.